In this video, I'm going to go over some very cool ways to control MIDI information with your Komplete Kontrol Mark III keyboards. Some of what I'm showing here will definitely work with the Mark II keyboards as well. So what I will link to is an article that a good friend of mine, Nico, has made. And in this article, he goes over what I'm going to show you, how to assign knobs and buttons to any virtual instrument and make a template that will have two-way communication between the hardware and the software. And recently I showed a video where you could set up a template on the Mark III and control software, but it wasn't a two-way thing. It was like I could turn a knob and it would turn the knob on, say, Omnisphere, but there was no way for me to turn the knob on Omnisphere and have it control what is showing up on the hardware. So really not an ideal situation by any stretch. What Nico has figured out is how to use the MIDI remote functionality in Cubase to be kind of a go-between between your hardware and your software. So it goes through the MIDI remote to the hardware, and from the hardware to the MIDI remote to the software. So it's quite a complex setup. So I'll show you a little bit of it right here, and then I will go through the whole setup of how you could make your own template with something like Retrolog. I'm also going to show you something that's very exciting. I just got this in the mail, and it's Endorphins and Loopop's little collaboration called the Plus 3. And he's done an amazing video on it already, and there's a bunch of other people that have done videos, but I just want to show you one little thing that you could do with Cubase using the same MIDI remote technology that I am going to use for this template that we're going to make with Komplete Kontrol Mark III. So thanks so much to Loopop for sending this over. Thanks to Nico for making this article and showing me how to do these templates, because it's really going to take your control of virtual instruments to the next level without having to use Native Instruments' own Komplete Kontrol software. So you could set up templates for instruments that already have templates in the Komplete Kontrol software if you don't want to use that software. If you just want to use the hardware and have MIDI information converted into something different that you use in Cubase to control VST automation. So instead of MIDI CC, we're using VST automation. So first off, let's look at this little Plus 3 thing from Loopop. It's got two 1/4-inch cables, TRS and TS, and those ones I've got fed into my Komplete Kontrol Mark III keyboard, and I've got them into the expression jack and to one of the additional jacks that are on the back. And basically you can look at this and think of it as two separate things. There's a fader, and then there's a button and another button, and these are basically sustain, and these are mapped to expression. A ton of different things you can do with this, so make sure you go check out his video. Recently I did a soundtrack, and I just wanted to easily control dynamics of the strings after I had put all of my strings in, and all I needed was one fader. And of course, on these Komplete Kontrol Mark III keyboards, we don't have faders. So something like this would be perfect if you have a keyboard like this and just want one fader to control certain parameters. So normally you would use this for sustain, and there's all sorts of different things you can do with that, like have the sustain just stay on while you play, and then you can clear it with that little button right there, so it keeps clearing it, and this is just kind of on the whole time. Or you can turn it off and just use this like a sustain pedal. And then the expression slider, again, is just something we can assign to pretty much any parameter in your program. What I've done with Cubase is I've set up a MIDI remote template, and I'm going to walk you through this whole process in the rest of this video. Suffice it to say, all I did was go edit my template, and I added an extra fader and a button. And so this button is the sustain, and this fader, obviously this fader right here. Now what I've done is mapped these controls. So you double click on them, it opens up the mapping assistant. And in this mapping assistant, I've gone over to the search function here and just typed in AI. And this is something that's been in Cubase for a long time. All I've done is assign value at mouse pointer to this fader. And then I've assigned value at mouse pointer in lock state to the button. And again, to learn how to set this up, watch the rest of the video. Once I've done that, watch what we can do with Loopop's neat little controller. So in any of the Steinberg virtual instruments, I can mouse over something like this level right here and just start moving. And this fader now controls the level. Mouse over the attack, and now it's changing the attack. I can do that basically to any control. If I go over to my mixer, I can just mouse over the mixer, and now I'm controlling this fader, now I'm controlling this fader, Now I'm controlling this fader. I don't even need to click. All I have to do is mouse over it. You can go to the EQ settings of your track. Let's turn that one on. I'm just going to mouse over the volume. Then I'm going to mouse over the frequency, move that side to side, and then the Q value down at the bottom. So I can make this narrow or wide, all by using this one little fader. Pretty cool. Now it gets even cooler because, again, Nico showed me how to do this. If you mouse over something and then you move your mouse away, obviously you lose your connection to that little fader. But because we mapped this button here to value at mouse pointer in lock state, now when I mouse over something, so say this track volume, mouse over it, because remember these buttons are kind of connected. If I lock that in, look at that, I can move my mouse away, and now I can go do anything else, and my volume is locked to that little fader. It's kind of like we temporarily locked this fader to this one control. Let's clear that, so we let it go, and we put our fader over top of, say, the frequency. So now we're moving the frequency back and forth. We lock that in. I can... Doesn't matter where my mouse is. So there you go, Loopop, a totally different usage of this really cool little device that you've made up. So I love it. Go check out the video. I'll have links in the description. So thanks again, Loopop, for sending that over. So now let's look at these templates. I'll show you what's so exciting about it, and then I'm going to walk you through how to actually set it up. Here's one that I've made for Serum. And I can turn the two oscillators on and off right here. So there's oscillator B, and there's oscillator A. We've also got noise. Let me turn that one off. And let's turn the sub on. And let's go to page 2, and we're going to turn the sub up. And the same thing, we can turn the noise back on, but turn the level of the noise down. Can even change the noise pitch. Let's turn the noise back off. Let's turn the reverb on. Turn the reverb up. And the best part about this whole thing is if I were to go and make another Serum, watch what happens to all of the controls on it when I switch from one track to the other. You see all of those controls change. And that is only because of this MIDI remote setup that we can do inside Cubase. It's extremely powerful. Not only that, if I change something here, it changes on the hardware as well. So you can see I'm moving my mouse up and down, and the cutoff is changing on the hardware. Same thing would happen if you were to record automation. So remember, now we're not using MIDI CC, we're actually recording VST automation in Cubase, using the MIDI remote to convert basically MIDI information into VST automation. So now I can go record. And then we can see it written as automation right here. And then watch what happens when I press play. It's going to read the automation, and we're going to see the... You could go in and edit your own automation in here, and you're going to see all of that change on the hardware as well. Watch this. So it's just a brilliant setup. So exciting to actually be able to control and have this two-way connection between any virtual instrument. So if you want to see how this is all done, go watch the rest of the video. So thanks to Nico for helping me with this and achieving this kind of vision that I had for the software and for the control. He's gone and figured it out and spent hours on Zoom with me, making this a reality. So hopefully some people will get some benefit out of this as well, because I'm just excited to be able to use this beautiful screen to be able to control other software or potentially hardware. So let's get right into it. I'll walk you through the basic steps, what we need to do in Cubase to use this MIDI remote thing. And once you've got that set up, you will then have to make a template on the hardware itself, which is kind of fun. So for starters, I do already have this set up because I was going through this with Nico yesterday. I think most of what I'm doing here will coincide with what he's doing in the article. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to use Retrolog as our first example synthesizer. We're also going to make a new script for Complete Kontrol MK3 in Cubase. And you will be able to set these up as complex as you want for yourself. Let's start at the actual hardware itself. And to get to the templates, all you have to do is hit Shift Browser. And you'll see I've got a bunch of stuff in here, including stuff I did before. And what Nico and I did yesterday is we started making a template for myself called Jeff's Uber template. And this one would be maybe a starting point with a whole bunch of basic controls, all the CC information set up the way I want it. And then I could use that as a starting point for other virtual instruments, because I'm going to have to do this for Omnisphere. I'm going to have to do this for Serum. I'm going to have to do this for maybe Noisy 2, that new software by Expressive E. So if I want to optimize my time, it makes way more sense to do that. So all you have to do when you make a new template is hit the New button up top, and you're going to get a blank template. And when you hit New Template, let's just have a look at it. Let's call this Demo. And you do have to do a lot of clicking and sliding. And I got to say, I remember when I was first complaining about the Machine Plus, my good friend Blez Beats was like, dude, I love clicking around. And he's kind of right. You know, it is kind of fun. And it would be nice to have a touch screen or actual software interface to do this, which we might get in the future. But whatever, it's the way it is right now. So now I'm going to hit the Edit button for my demo one, and you're going to see what you are going to be faced with the first time you do this. So you're going to get CC14 as the first knob, and CC112 as the first button. They're all going to be on channel 1. That's just the default setup. So you could start right there. We start at CC14 because there is other CC information that's kind of default setting for any synthesizer. Like CC1 is always going to be your mod wheel, and you don't really want to mess with that. But what Nico said was, why don't you actually set all of your CC information to start with on a different channel? Then you can start at CC0. So that's what we've done in my little template. It really doesn't matter what you do. There's just a couple things that really matter at this point. So what we did is we went and made a template, Jeff's Uber template, hit Edit. I can only see myself doing like maybe 2 or 3 pages of knobs. But in the future, if I wanted to, I can go as deep as I want, and that's why we started at 0. So what we've done is we started with the first knobs, channel 16, CC0, and the buttons we've set to channel 15 and CC0. So 15 and 16. And that shouldn't interfere with any kind of information that we're using on virtual instruments that are not MPE. Once we get into MPE, things might get a little bit scarier, but Nico's assured me that Complete Kontrol MK3's Poly Aftertouch doesn't matter on channels, and that's what you'll notice with MPE. So we set the buttons to channel 15, we've set the knobs to channel 16, and I could make 16 pages of knobs if I wanted to, all the way to the end. So if you want to add more pages, by the way, you click page 1, and you see that I've only got 2 pages as the default template for the Complete Kontrol MK3. All you have to do is hold Shift, and you get Add, and you can add another page of parameters. So if I've hit page 3, now you can see page 1, page 2, and now we've got page 3, which is going to be empty. The other thing that you're going to want to change, whatever you do, if you want this to work, you have to set this mode to relative. You'll see that in the software, we actually have to change this as well. So in the MIDI remote software, you're going to have to, when you make your template, you have to make sure that every single knob that you're using is set to the value mode of relative 2's complement. And this is kind of the magic ingredient that makes these knobs very smooth when you're actually controlling anything. And you'll see in my old video, things were quite skippy. So relative 2's complement and relative on the hardware, and Bob will be your uncle. So that's what we have to do for every single knob. And this takes a while. Like we went through and we changed all of these knobs, all of these buttons, and then I went to page 2 and did the same thing, set the channel to a different channel and so on. So I'm still not even done my template. I just wanted to get this video out. So you've gone through your 2 pages, whatever you decide to keep your channel and your CC number on really doesn't matter. It's kind of up to you. The other thing that we changed on every single knob is this display mode. So it started out as an integer, and let's just look at what an integer on this control would look like. So now we get a number up top. So we can see it's CC0 or whatever, and we get a number. And that number goes up to 127, whereas what we did with it is we set that display mode to a percentage. So now when you turn that knob, all you see is a percentage above. And the next thing to do would be to check your buttons. These are the buttons up top, which you can't see from the top camera, but you can see from over there. And all I did on my buttons, just for fun, was to actually give them different colors, because they can actually have a different color up top. You can't really do anything with the knobs, but you can give these different colors. So all I did was to go to the buttons up top. So here I'm on the top button. I click to the second page, and you can see there's a color. So I've gone through for each button and given it the next consecutive color. So I just went through and changed all of those buttons to have different colors. So what I would recommend doing is go back to your browser, make a duplicate of it so that you have everything just in case you go and screw things up, because it can take a long time to set the stuff up. So I always like backups. So now I'm back to my Uber template, and here's where we could go and start assigning some really obvious controls to our template. So what we might want to do with our template is have a bunch of knobs that are always going to be a certain message. And we can even decide this right now. So we're working with the Retrolog, a basic subtractive analog synthesizer. And some of the controls that you're always going to be reaching for would be stuff like the main volume and the filter, all of these really obvious things. So let's change the very first knob. We're going to rename that to cutoff. And we'll save that. And then we're going to go to the second one, and we're going to rename that one resonance. And some of the most obvious things that I'm going to change would be the envelope. So attack, decay down to a sustain level, and then as you release the key, there's the release. Those are the 4 stages of most common envelopes. So I'm going to put those 4 controls in this one. So why don't we actually change these 2 here to delay and reverb. So now we've got all the basic things that we might want for a synthesizer all on the front page. And for the buttons, we can do a couple things as well. What we're going to do right above the reverb is we're going to actually make this button the reverb on or off. So if I click the Effects tab, we actually have this reverb button on and off right here. So I'm just going to rename those reverb and delay, and we're just going to understand that that means turning them on and off. So rename that one. There's a few other things that we could try assigning to these buttons. One thing that Nico likes to assign his to is turning the arpeggiator on or off for a synth like this. So we could rename this one ARP. Have another control that decides whether this synth is monophonic or polyphonic. And then the other thing Nico has set up is oscillator 1, 2, and 3 as the next button. So you can turn those on or off with the hardware itself. Okay, so we've got oscillator 1, 2, 3, and then the last one we will put the sub on there, because I feel like that's something you might want to do a lot on this synth as well. Okay, so we've got a whole set of controls mapped out on the keyboard. Just keep in mind that this is specific to the Retrolog. If I were to open this up for, say, something like Serum, it's going to be a little different. I think we only have 2 main oscillators in Serum. So I would probably go and change some of the parameters, but whatever, this is just a starting point. So I'm going to hit done, and we're going to duplicate this again. I'm just going to call this Retrolog. Okay, so I've got a template now made for Retrolog. I can go add to this later on, add more pages to it, add more controls, but for now this will be good enough to show off how this whole software connection works. Next thing we need to do now is go to the software itself and start configuring things. This is going to assume that you don't have any kind of template set up for Complete Control yet, so we're going to go and show you the steps for that first. And this is all in the recent MIDI remote controls that they gave us maybe in Cubase 11 or 12, I can't remember when it first came in. And the first thing you're going to need to do to start this out is go up to Studio, MIDI Remote Manager, and here you're going to have to make a surface. So you're going to want to go Add Surface, and we're going to go Native Instruments, and we're going to call this one ComCon Mark III. And then you're going to want to choose Control S61 Mark III Main for the input and the output. Then you go create controller surface, and then you're faced with this window right here. So we might as well go through the whole setup. And I'm going to go to my Retrolog preset on the hardware itself. So I want this to be a button first, because I'm going to do rows of buttons, rows of knobs, rows of buttons, rows of knobs for the different pages. So I click on the first one right here. Let's change this to button. There we go. So now I've got a button. Next thing you're going to want to do is start hitting the buttons so it can learn the buttons on your hardware and what MIDI channel they're actually coming out on. So if I click that button right now and I look at it, we can see that it is channel 15 CC0, just like I had set up in my template. So this might be different on yours. The next thing I want to do is click the next slot, and then you can just go through and just press all of them. And you should have 8, and it should be on the 9th one ready to go for another one, but you're not going to put anything there. So the next thing we do is get the knobs. So I click right here, and I want my knobs to be a full square. So I'm going to resize that, and I'm going to change it to knob. Now I'm going to turn the first knob, turn the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, and 8th. And then I'm going to set another row of buttons, so a second page, because we do have 2 pages in my template. I just haven't used it yet. So now I go to the second page. This is super important. I scan over to the next page, and I go through and I press all of those. And I do the same thing for the knobs. And then I turn that knob. So now it's getting the message of this next page of parameters. And I could keep going. I could have, I think, up to 16 different pages, which is insane. But I'm not going to worry about mapping, you know, the play and the stop and stuff like that, because those are just going to work with the keyboard already. This jog wheel is going to work beautifully. So we don't need to mess with that. So what I need to do now is also very important. I have to go in and click on each knob and change the value mode to relative 2's complement over on the right-hand side. Very important. If you don't do that, you're going to get this skippy control on these knobs. The other thing I got to do is make sure I'm actually touching the right one. So I'm on the second page. That's my lower row of knobs. I'm going to go back so that I'm on my first page. And I'm going to set this first knob to relative 2's complement. Now I can move the next knob, and it actually jumps over to this next knob, which is great. And you can see that things are not working properly right here. Let's set that to relative 2's complement. And now look at that. This knob works beautifully. I go to the next one. And all you have to do is touch it at this point and then change it over in the software. It would be nice if we could just select all of them, but we can't. So now I page over to the next one, click on this one, or I could have just moved the knob and just go through and do all of these. So I'll skip ahead now. Go back to MIDI controller surface, and there is my control surface all set up. I should be able to start moving these knobs and see them all move on the actual software itself, and it's all working beautifully. I could go to the second page, and now I see the other set working. Okay, that's all working just fine. Great. So now what we need to do is, in Retrolog, assign what these knobs and buttons are actually doing. So if I go back to my first page, I've decided that this is set to cutoff. So what we need to do in the software is also kind of complicated. We click this little drop-down menu in your virtual instrument, whichever one you're working on, and we're going to go to something called the Remote Control Editor. So this is this old looking software. Hopefully they don't change anything on us. What we are going to do is we're going to realize that page 1, these first 8 controls, is going to correspond to our first 8 buttons. The next 8 controls is going to correspond to our 8 knobs on our first page. So it's a little bit weird. Wouldn't it be nice if we could just change this to page 1 buttons, page 1 knobs, or something like that, but we can't. And most virtual instruments are already set up to have all of the information of every knob that they've got in there. So once we've closed this area to get out of editing the control surface, what we need to do is we need to make some changes. You double click this, open up this window right here. This is the MIDI Remote Mapping Assistant, and you get to that with this little pencil. And in here, you're going to want to go to Selected Track, and then you're going to go to Instrument, and then you're going to go to Parameters, and then you're going to go to Setup. And for this setup here, so let's set this to 64. Now what we want to do is set this square right here to parameter 1. And all we have to do is double click on that. And now that is going to lock whatever parameter 1 is in this thing called this Remote Control Editor. Whatever parameter in our virtual instrument is set in slot 1 here, parameter 1, that's what's going to get communicated to the hardware through the MIDI remote map. So now we need to go to the next button. We double click on that one and we hit parameter 2. Double click. We can do this by the hardware itself, which is going to make things a lot faster for you. Click the next button and then the next one, 8. Next one is our knob. So I'm going to turn this knob. That's 9, 10, 11, 12, just double clicking and going through. Okay, so now I can see parameters 1 all the way through to 16 are set to these first buttons and knobs. I could then go and do the rest one of these as well, which I might as well do. So I'll just skip ahead. So I'm just going to go to the second page, hit that button, and you can see that it's selected, and that should be parameter 17, and so on and so forth. Okay, so I've just mapped all 32, and you can see I can check my numbers in order just to make sure I got those all correct. Everything looks good. 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32. So once we've done this now, we can close this menu, and we can go back over to our remote control editor, and that's where this final step of magic happens. So I'm going to start from scratch again. We've got our virtual instrument. We click on this button right here. We go to remote control editor. And this is where we decide what each knob and each button is assigned to on your virtual instrument. Okay, so I just removed all assignments, so now I've got nothing assigned, so I can start from scratch with you. What we decide is this first row here actually corresponds to our first 8 buttons on our hardware. Make sure you're on your first page. So I go to this first page right here, and I'm going to click this knob drop down, and there I can see every control for the Retrolog. And I got to say, if you're going to do this with Omnisphere, which I might do in a future video, Omnisphere is one of the virtual instruments that doesn't come with all of this stuff mapped. You have to go through one more step, which isn't that big of a deal, and I can show you how to do that in another video because Nico showed me how to do that. So I could just type ARP, because that's the first one we want, and I'm going to choose ARP Enable. And then we hit apply, and now we can see on our template here that ARP Enable is the very first button. Let's go look at our ARP here and see if ARP Enable is working. And it does. One thing that Nico did mention is on your buttons here, make sure that they are all set to jump. And you can see that all of my buttons here on my first 8 parameters are not actually set to jump. So we need to go to value, and we're going to go to jump. And actually, I think all of them should just be set to jump. So I'm going to take all of my parameters, shift click, and make sure they are set to jump. So now let's try a different button and see if this works. And we're going to turn this mono button on and off. So I'm going to click this next parameter, which is our mono button. And I am then going to either search for mono right here, or I can actually hit this learn button, and it's kind of a quicker way to find it. So you hit learn, I hit apply, and now when I press the mono button, it makes the synth either mono or poly. So that's working perfectly. Okay, so next things we need to do is turn on oscillator 1, 2, and 3. So I'm going to go through and just map these buttons to oscillator 1, 2, and 3 with the learn function on. And then I'm going to map the sub on to the next button. Next ones are a little more complicated. We're going to go to the effects, and we're going to click the delay. And I've still got the learn feature on. So I click delay enable and reverb enable. I hit apply, and all of those get sent now automatically to our template down at the bottom. Okay, next thing we need to do is map these knobs to whatever we want the knobs to assign to in Retrolog. So I'm going to click on the next page, and we're going to go to cutoff. So I'm with the learn feature on, I just start finding those parameters. So cutoff, next one is resonance, next one is attack on the envelope, decay, and then the next ones we've got our delay and reverb, and that's the amount of reverb that we actually want, or delay. So I click on the effects, and I just clicked the wrong one. That's okay. I'm just going to choose this mix knob right here, delay mix and reverb mix. So now those are all assigned in this remote control editor, which is going to speak to our MIDI remote, which is then going to speak to our keyboard. So complex, isn't it? Okay, I hit apply. All of our knobs and buttons have been assigned to something. And let's check it. So we've got cutoff, we've got resonance, attack, decay, sustain, release, and then we've got delay level right here. We've got reverb level, which isn't actually turned on, so I can press the button to turn on my reverb. So let's make a new Retrolog so we can really see that this is working properly. So we'll go retrolog and hit add track. Now this track should be set up to just work with our template. I should be able to go to the first page and turn on reverb. I should be able to turn on the sub. Great, let's maybe turn down the reverb a little bit. Let's turn the delay on. Let's play with the attack. Let's play with the release. Okay, let's play with the filter. And then let's go back over to resonance. So everything seems to be working, controlling the software. Now watch this. Watch what happens if I play a chord and play with the cutoff on the software. We can watch the hardware and we see that it is actually reflecting whatever the knob is on the software, which is like actually the first time we've been able to do this properly with this keyboard. And because we've got that relative mode set, your controls are always going to be very smooth. We can look at my attack right now. One thing we have to remember is that this is converting information, but this is going to be VST automation. This isn't regular old MIDI CC control that we're recording anymore. So what we need to do is make sure if we want to record any of our moves, is that we turn on the automation for the track. Okay, so now we've just written in some automation for this track. We can see that it's recorded it. It looks good. I could go in and change that after the fact. So if you do want to rewrite some automation, set it to auto latch and watch what happens now. Now it'll let me reset the level, stays there, keeps writing it, and keeps writing it at that point up until you press stop. Now we've rewritten that automation. When we press play, watch what happens to the hardware. It's all reflecting on the hardware. So for the first time, you're getting this back and forth one-to-one. You know, when you open up a virtual instrument, wherever the parameters are at, that's where they're at in the software. And this is what is so special about this whole setup. I hope you guys are excited about this as I am, because I feel like for the very first time, I might actually start using hardware to control my virtual instruments, because it might actually be easier than reaching up, grabbing the mouse, finding that filter cutoff, and starting to change something. I get to see it right here. I get to watch it change as it changes in the song that I've recorded. You know, this is really powerful stuff. So very excited about these templates, very excited about making my own for all of my virtual instruments that I use the most, and then maybe even seeing how this works with the hardware as well. So I do have affiliate links in the description. That's one way to help me out. But mostly I think if you can let Nico know how happy you are with this whole setup and thank him for it, because I couldn't have done this at all without his help. So if you're new here, hit the subscribe button and the bell, and I'll see you in the next video. Last thing, if you do use this and set it up, let me know how it's working for you, because some people might take this even farther than I will, so we'll see how it goes.